Well, my dear people of God, to approach the text of the readings that we have today, particularly the gospel, I think it's important for us to put two things to rest. We want to understand the historical context in which this text comes to us. This past week, we celebrated the feast of St. Matthew, Apostle, and Evangelist. Evangelist is one who wrote a gospel. Matthew's gospel comes to us about between 60 and 70 years after the time of Christ. And at this time, the way, which is what we now call church, at the time, they called it the way because it was really a movement outside of Judaism, the religion of the Jews. And Jesus had died, resurrected, is gone to heaven. So this new way of approaching God was gathering momentum. But now there are new people who are coming into the faith, into this new way. There were Greeks, Romans, and other cultures around. So there was a problem of assimilation. Because, see, for the Jews, they had in their minds very exclusive and personal relationship with God. God was Yahweh, the God of Israel. If you were not Israelite, if you're not Jew, you could not be a part of this family. But really, that was not what God said. God said, "You be my people, I'll be your God." And through Israel, every other nation in the world will come to know me as the true God. That is what God said to them. So when Matthew was writing his gospel, one of the major things he was trying to do was to explain to the Jews why others had to come in. You read Matthew, you start with the genealogy. He starts trying to explain to the Jews, yes, the promise of the Messiah that is linked to the house of David is completed. And then he goes on to the teachings. Then he goes on to the parables. Then he goes on to the healing ministry. And concludes his gospel by Jesus saying, "Now I have all authority in heaven and on earth given to me by my Father. I extend that authority to you, my followers. Go into the whole world, make disciples of all the nations." That was Matthew's thing. And so it explains to us the logic behind the parable of today. Because by every human standard, of course, this doesn't make any sense. In fact, every time I read that text, I know myself. I know I'll be the rebel leader. If I started at 6 in the morning, and you pay me the same thing with some guy who started at 5, oh no. No, that's not going to happen. I probably gang up with the guys who started at 6 and the guys at 9, maybe even incorporate some of the guys from noon. We'll waylay all those guys who did 1 hour work and collected the same pay. We'll beat the living daylights out of them, take their money, and go home. But see, the whole idea is not human reason. It's not the logic. It is the idea that God, in his own way, understands the human situation and the human mind. That is why in the readings, the second reading, the first reading says, "My ways are not your ways. My thinking is not your thinking." You see how we think as human beings? We think in a sense of justice. What is just to me? We don't often think in terms of what is just to the other. We see everything based on the idea that is just to me from my position. And somehow we're all born into that. You find kids in the home, they will tell you, "Well, I've been good, therefore, you should give me ice cream. I've been good, therefore, buy me sneakers." And we grew up with that. I certainly grew up in a situation like that where in my home, everyone had chores. And all our chores were conditioned by your gender. So my sisters were the kitchen people. They had to do all the laundry, but back then we didn't have washing machines, so they did it physically by hand. I was the only grown-up boy in the house. My little brothers were too little to do anything other than cry and run around the house. So here we go. I have to take care of 2 cars every morning before I ever head out to school. Over the weekend, I had to cut grass, but there was no mowing machine. I had a machete under the hot sun. Now, 3 girls did all the laundry. I had to do all the ironing. So up till this day, I hate ironing. But I always felt a sense that it was not just to me that these 3 girls would do all the washing. I had to do all the ironing. So it's always a sense like that, and we bring that to our relationships. Oh, I've been faithful to my spouse. Therefore, my spouse must be faithful to me. That is in your thinking. It's not reality. Because you're good does not necessarily mean the other person will have to be good to you. Oh, I've put all these years in service to this job. I should be promoted. Yeah, right. If things were okay. But things are not always okay. Someone else who just showed up yesterday might be brought and they'll be promoted over you. What are you going to do? Which brings us to the second thing. While humanity thinks in terms of what is just to me, God thinks in terms of mercy and love. And that is the thing that plays out in the story of these people. That it doesn't matter when you show up. What is important is that you show up, because the mercy of God welcomes us anyway. If his relationship with us were to be based mainly on justice, I doubt if any one of us will ever see heaven. Because it is the mercy of God that tempers his justice. And that is why a guy shows up at 5 o'clock and gets the same thing with a guy who showed up at 6. When we look at what we do even as church, even as society, we must be careful that we don't live our lives based on the idea of justice only. Some people say, I pray the rosary, I go to mass, I put money in the basket, therefore God must be good to me. Nope. God does not have to be anything to you. He decides because he's God. All of those things are necessary for us to do, but don't get a hang up on it. Because I see some people, I've heard this in different parishes, they have a misunderstanding with their priest. Oh, I don't like that priest. Who does he think he is? I'm no longer going to that parish. So, okay, goodbye, good luck. Who knows what you're going to get in the next place you're running to? Oh, I don't like that priest. I don't like his attitude. Is this, is that. I will no longer put money in the basket. Keep your money. You know why? Because God is able to provide for his own needs, with or without you. When you do good in the community of faith, you do it because that is your responsibility. Don't expect anybody to pat you on the back. Only God can do that. When we extend that to our own relationships, whether as married people, whether as family, whether as siblings, we understand then that because we have done something good is not the necessity to think a reciprocal action should be taken for us. As we think about politics today, think in terms of people who think it is necessary to build a wall to separate this country from another country. While I do understand the politics of boundary and regional control, building a wall does not solve that problem. It's policy making. If you say that, well, if there are children in this country whose parents are undocumented aliens who live here, they don't have the right papers to live here, well, we're sending everybody packing. It is because you're thinking in terms of justice, only about yourself. But remember that many people came into this country 2-3 generations ago on the boat and got off at Ellis Island with nothing for the same reason they are here. Again, it's policy making. And to make right policies that concerns everybody, we must come to it with mercy and love. And everyone is welcome. Let us then flip this story a little bit. Let us presume that the man who's hiring people shows up and says, guys, come and work for me today. At the end of the day, I'll give you myself. In which sense he's saying, I'll have you come to my house for a meal. So he goes out at 6, at 9, at 12, at 3, and then at 5. And at 6, everybody is done working. And he says, come to my house. And they walk into this house, and they find this table laid out with beautiful meals, with wine, with beer. Everybody sits down and starts to have a good time. Nobody will complain about what time they started. As long as the food is good and the booze is good, everybody is happy. But fundamentally, that is what Jesus is telling you. Because what Jesus is offering is the gift of himself to each one of us. And if everyone is a part of Jesus, it doesn't matter who has come early in the morning or who is coming late. The same Jesus on the cross who said to that rogue, that thief, who said, look, all I've done in my life is rob people and steal from others. I deserve what I'm doing here on the cross, but not him. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus gave himself. And Jesus has given us that same gift in word, in sacrament. And he wants us to turn away from this sense of justice that judges others and only satisfies ourselves. To turn again and look at each other when we make mistakes, when we're in sin, when we fall, to look at each other with mercy and love and forgiveness. And because Jesus welcomes us by himself, with himself, we also reach out to others and to hug each other and extend a hand of fellowship. Because in this church, in this journey of life, all of us are welcomed by the Lord. And he expects each of us to welcome each other. Amen.